The most dangerous misunderstanding of karma is not only that it makes people afraid, it is that it can make people cold. A person suffers, and instead of meeting that suffering with compassion, the mind quietly asks, what did they do to deserve this? Someone loses their health, their marriage, their home, or their sense of safety. And the word karma is lifted like a gavel. It becomes a verdict. It becomes a way to make pain feel orderly from a distance. But in the early Buddhist teachings, karma is not a courtroom built above human life. It is not a cosmic punishment system. It is not a divine reward program. Karma begins much closer than that. It begins in intention, the movement of the mind before the word, before the gesture, before the reaction. The teaching becomes sharper when it stops pointing at fate and starts pointing at the movement of the mind. Wrong view turns karma into a courtroom. Right seeing turns it into a mirror. Karma is not mainly a story about what the universe will do to you later. It is also the way the mind becomes trained by what it repeatedly intends now. The first result may not be an event outside you. Sometimes the first result is a tendency inside you. If karma is not punishment, then the real question is not who deserves this. The deeper question is, what is being formed in the mind every time it chooses? When karma is misunderstood, life becomes a courtroom. The first seeing is not to explain another person's suffering too quickly. Before karma teaches us how to explain suffering, it asks whether the heart has already become cold while explaining it. A person falls into hardship, and the mind searches for a hidden crime. Someone becomes ill, and a cold little theory appears before compassion has time to breathe. A family breaks apart, and instead of seeing grief, exhaustion, history, and countless conditions, the mind wants a verdict. It wants suffering to make sense. It wants the world to be fair enough that fear can relax. There is a strange comfort in that. If every wound is deserved, then maybe we can protect ourselves by being good enough, careful enough, pure enough. If pain always has a moral explanation, then the chaos of life feels less frightening. But that comfort has a cruel edge. It can make us look at another human being's tears and secretly think, this must be their karma. That is not wisdom. That is fear wearing religious clothing. The Buddha did not teach karma so we could stand above other people's pain and interpret it like a case file. He taught it so we could understand the moral weight of our own intentions. In the early teachings, karma is linked with intention, what we mean, what we choose, what we cultivate through body, speech, and mind. The mirror turns inward. I have wanted karma to be simple when I was afraid of how unfair life looked. I have wanted an explanation that would make suffering less terrifying. But the Dhamma does not become deeper when the heart becomes colder. Right understanding does not remove compassion. It makes compassion more careful. Wrong view turns karma into a courtroom. Right seeing keeps the mirror close. And a mirror is not meant for examining someone else's wound from a safe distance. A mirror does not ask who deserves the wound. It only shows the expression forming on our own face before we speak, before we judge, before we turn away. In the same way, the teaching on karma asks us to look honestly at what we are training the mind to become. Anger leaves a trace. Generosity leaves a trace. Deceit leaves a trace. Patience leaves a trace. Not because a judge is waiting above the clouds, but because the mind is shaped by the directions it practices. Karma is not a weapon to aim at another person's suffering. It is a mirror held close to the next intention. And once the mirror turns inward, the teaching becomes even sharper. Karma does not begin with the action people see. It begins with the intention we often hide even from ourselves. The outside of an action can be misleading. The action is visible. The intention is where the training begins. Two people may say the same sentence, "I just wanted to be honest." One says it with care, hoping to reduce confusion. Another says it with a hidden wish to cut. From the outside, the sentence may look almost identical. Inside, the intention is different. That difference matters. In the early Buddhist teachings, karma is intentional action. The body, the mouth, and the hand are important, but the mind behind them gives the action its moral shape. A gift can be generous, or it can be a strategy. Silence can be wise, or it can be punishment. Correction can be helpful, or it can be pride looking for a clean robe to wear. The mind often hides its roots under respectable words. Anger rarely introduces itself as anger. It says, "I am only telling the truth." Pride rarely says, "I need to win." It says, "I need to correct the record." Cruelty rarely says, "I want them to hurt." It says, "They need to learn." Fear rarely says, "I am afraid." It says, "I am protecting my peace." I have called my anger honesty because honesty sounded cleaner. You may feel it in the throat before you speak. A small heat rises. The sentence is ready. It has logic. It has evidence. It may even sound calm. The thumb hovers over send, and the body already knows the sentence is not only meant to explain, it is meant to land. Underneath, something tighter is moving. You want the other person to feel what you felt. You want your pain to become their discomfort. That moment is not small. The first fruit of karma is not always what happens outside. Sometimes the first fruit is what becomes easier inside. When anger is repeated, anger starts to feel like truth. When lying is repeated, truth starts to feel dangerous. When contempt is repeated, tenderness starts to look weak. When restraint is practiced, a pause becomes more available. When compassion is practiced, it becomes less dramatic and more natural. This is not punishment. It is training. The mind learns its direction from what it keeps doing. It learns from the intention behind the message we send, the silence we use, the apology we withhold, the kindness we offer when no one is watching. Karma is not the universe keeping score. It is the mind becoming familiar with its own choices. That is why the Buddha points us back to intention. Not so we become afraid of every thought, but so we stop letting unwholesome roots hide under beautiful excuses. And once intention becomes central, consequence no longer needs a punisher. Consequence does not require a judge. A room grows tense when harsh words are repeated. Trust thins when small lies become normal. Envy, fed day after day, can make another person's happiness feel like a personal loss. The result is not a sentence from above. It is the shape of causes meeting conditions. No courtroom is needed. This is closer to the way karma works in the Buddha's teaching. Intentional actions have results because actions condition experience. They shape habits, perceptions, relationships, and future possibilities. The mind becomes familiar with what it repeats. The world we meet is partly colored by the mind we keep training. But this must be understood carefully. Right seeing does not flatten life into one cause. It learns to see conditions, body, aging, illness, environment, other people's choices, history, accident, and causes too complex for ordinary sight. To reduce every pain to one past action is not wisdom. It is a misuse of a deep teaching. Some people use karma to blame others, but others turn the courtroom inward. They suffer and quietly whisper, "Maybe this is my karma. Maybe I did something wrong. Maybe I deserve this." That is still not wisdom. That is pain searching for a religious explanation. The Buddha's teaching on karma was not given so a wounded heart could become its own judge. It was given so the mind could see intention clearly and choose more carefully now. There is a difference between understanding causes and assigning blame. Understanding causes makes the heart more responsible. Blame makes the heart hard. A person standing beside someone in grief does not need a theory first. They need a human presence, a cup of water, a quiet chair, a hand that does not rush to explain. The Dhamma does not ask us to become cold analysts of other people's pain. It asks us to become careful with the causes we ourselves continue to create. A harsh word today may not create visible disaster tomorrow. But it can make harshness more available. A generous act today may not erase every sorrow, but it can soften the mind that performed it. A mindful pause may not stop the entire storm, but it can interrupt the habit of becoming the storm. I have looked for dramatic results before, when the real result was already happening quietly inside the mind. The breath had shortened, the face had tightened, the body had leaned toward attack. Or, in another moment, the hand loosened, the jaw unclenched. The old sentence did not leave the mouth. Karma is not punishment, because there is no need for a punisher. The law is more intimate than that. What we repeatedly intend, we repeatedly incline toward. And if karma is consequence rather than punishment, another fear appears. Does the past already have the final word? Another misunderstanding turns karma into fate. Someone says, "This is just my karma," and the words sound humble, but underneath them there may be defeat. A person stays in a harmful pattern because they believe the past has already written the whole road. They sit beside the same closed door and call helplessness acceptance. But karma, as the Buddha taught it, does not mean the present is powerless. If karma were fixed fate, practice would make no sense. Right effort would make no sense. Mindfulness would make no sense. Ethical training would make no sense. The very existence of the path shows that the present moment has power. Not total power, not magical power, but real power. The past may condition the present, but it does not have to command every next step. The past has weight in the thumb that reaches for the phone, in the voice that sharpens before thought catches up, in the old sentence already forming in the mouth. That conditioning is real. The body remembers the old direction. The mind almost performs it before wisdom arrives. But weight is not command. The message can remain unsent. The jaw can soften. The breath can be known before the old self performs itself again. A new direction may begin so quietly that no one else sees it. This is the dignity of practice. Not a miracle. A pause that finally tells the truth. A person may have a strong habit of anger. The heat rises quickly. The voice sharpens before thought has fully formed. The old response rises with the force of something practiced for years. But in the narrow space before it becomes speech, something can be known. This is anger. That knowing is already the old pattern losing its secrecy. And when a pattern loses its secrecy, it has already lost some of its power. The Buddha's path is built on this possibility. We can abandon unwholesome states that have arisen. We can prevent some from growing. We can cultivate wholesome states not yet strong. We can maintain and deepen what is skillful. This is not fate. This is training. The path does not deny the weight of the past. It simply refuses to give the past the final word. I find this both relieving and uncomfortable. Relieving, because I am not completely trapped by what came before. Uncomfortable, because I can no longer honestly say my next intention does not matter. A painful event is not always a verdict, but a present intention is always a doorway. Karma is not a chain locked around the ankle. It is a direction the mind keeps practicing. And because it is practiced, it can also be retrained. But the deepest training is not always in the actions other people see. Sometimes it happens in the private rehearsal of the mind. Many people think karma belongs mostly to visible actions. Stealing, lying, hurting, giving, helping, speaking, leaving, staying. But the Buddha's teaching also asks us to look at the mind before it becomes visible. Not every passing thought is a full intentional action. Thoughts arise because of conditions. Feelings arise, memories arise, images arise. A person may sit quietly while the mind produces jealousy, fear, fantasy, anger, or shame without invitation. The danger begins when we start rehearsing them. A person lies in bed while the room is still. Nothing is being said aloud. No message is being sent. No door is being slammed. But inside, the mind is building a courtroom. It repeats the argument. It improves the accusation. It imagines the perfect sentence that would finally make the other person feel small. The body is under a blanket, but the mind is already in battle. The mind does not only become what it does, it becomes what it rehearses. In a simple way, the mind keeps becoming the self it practices. This is where karma becomes subtle. A resentful thought may arise. That is one thing. But then the mind feeds it, returns to it, polishes it, warms itself beside it. A jealous feeling may appear. That is one thing. But then the mind builds a story. Their happiness proves my lack. Their success reduces me. Their praise means I have been forgotten. Now the feeling is being trained into a view. In early Buddhist teaching, suffering often grows through this chain. Contact gives rise to feeling. Feeling can condition craving. Craving can condition clinging. Clinging can thicken into becoming. A whole identity built around wanting, resisting, defending, possessing. One unpleasant feeling becomes my enemy. One pleasant feeling becomes my right. One thought becomes me. This is why mindfulness matters. Not as a decoration. Not as a relaxation technique only. Mindfulness interrupts the rehearsal. The phone lies dark on the table while the mind travels years into a conflict that is not happening in the room. The body is here. The breath is here. The hand is still. But the mind has already believed the story and entered the trial. I know this movement in the body, the still face, the quiet room, and a mind secretly sharpening the same sentence again and again. Seeing it is not self-hatred. It is the beginning of freedom. The practice is not to punish yourself for thoughts arising. The practice is to notice what you are training. Not everything that appears in the mind must be believed, repeated, rehearsed, or obeyed. Before asking, "Why did this happen to me?" the Dhamma asks something more immediate. What is being formed in the mind right now? Karma becomes clearer when we see that the smallest inner movements, if chosen again and again, become the climate we live in. And this is why responsibility, when understood correctly, is not a whip. It is the first taste of freedom. The word responsibility can feel heavy when karma is misunderstood. It can sound like blame. It can sound like someone saying, "Your suffering is your fault." It can sound like a spiritual way to make pain more lonely. But in the Buddha's teaching, responsibility is not the same as blame. Blame freezes the heart. Responsibility opens the hand. Blame looks backward and searches for someone to condemn. Responsibility looks at the present and asks, what can be understood now? What can be abandoned now? What can be cultivated now? Blame creates shame. Responsibility creates practice. I have mistaken self-blame for responsibility, and it did not make the mind wiser. It only made suffering more personal. Self-blame can look humble, but sometimes it is only clinging, wearing the face of guilt. The self is still at the center, only now it is kneeling in front of an inner judge. That is not liberation. The Dhamma does not ask us to whip the mind into goodness. It asks us to understand the mind clearly enough that unwholesome roots lose some of their power. Greed is to be known. Hatred is to be known. Delusion is to be known. Not decorated, not denied, not turned into identity. Imagine noticing an inner judge raising the whip again. The old habit says, condemn yourself first, then maybe you will become good. But the Dhamma asks for something more honest than punishment. See the root clearly. See hatred as hatred. See fear as fear. See craving as craving. A mind that is seen clearly does not need to be beaten into wisdom. To see clearly is not to beat the mind. It is to stop letting the mind hide. The Buddha's teaching on karma has this kind of mercy. It does not pretend our intentions are harmless. But it also does not trap us in despair. It says, look carefully. Because what is conditioned can be understood, and what is repeatedly cultivated can be changed. A single mindful pause may look unimpressive from the outside. No one applauds when you do not send the bitter message. No one sees the moment you let jealousy pass without building a story around it. No one may notice when you choose to speak one sentence more gently than usual. But the mind notices. The mind receives training from these small acts. It learns that anger can arise without becoming speech. It learns that craving can burn without becoming obedience. It learns that fear can tremble without becoming cruelty. This is how responsibility becomes freedom. Not because we control everything, but because we stop pretending we control nothing. Karma is not asking you to carry the universe on your back. It is asking you to care for the next intention. And the next intention does not appear in a temple far away. It appears in the ordinary moment when the old story wants to speak through you again. You do not have to turn life into a courtroom. You do not have to sit above another person's suffering, searching for a verdict. And you do not have to drag yourself before an inner judge every time pain appears. Karma becomes less frightening when it stops being a story about punishment and becomes a practice of attention. The practice is quieter than a verdict. It begins with the next intention. The story may be loud, but the intention is closer. Before the next message is sent, before the next sharp sentence leaves the mouth, before the mind rehearses the same old resentment one more time, pause. Feel the body. Notice the direction of the heart. Ask gently, "What is this training in me?" That question is already a step on the path. Not because it solves every mystery of cause and result, not because it erases the past, but because in that small pause, the mind is no longer completely asleep inside its habit. It sees anger as anger. It sees fear as fear. It sees the story as a story. And when something is seen clearly, it does not rule in quite the same way. So choose one ordinary place to practice today. Before judging someone's suffering, let compassion arrive first. Before believing the story in your mind, feel the breath once. Before calling your cruelty honesty, look at the intention underneath the beautiful excuse. Write this in the comments. I will look at the intention before I believe the story. Then let that sentence become real in one small moment. A hand resting still, a mouth choosing fewer words. A breath known clearly before the mind builds another courtroom and calls it truth.